and we will work on reestablishing the orderly growth and efficiency of the air transport system. At the end, I wish that soon all countries will be able to succeed in overcoming all the obstacles that prevent the speedy recovery of the aviation sector. In closing, I leave you with a quote from His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the Crown Prince of the Emirate of Abu Dhabi, Deputy Supreme Commander of the United Arab Emirates Armed Forces. We will get through these tough times. We will come out stronger. Thank you very much.
Many thanks to His Excellency Saif Al Suwaidi, the Director General of the UAE's GCAA, for giving us the wonderful welcome address. I'd like to hand over, and it's with great pleasure that to continue the welcome address, we have on stage with us Mr. Ismail Mohammed Al-Balushi, who's the Assistant Director General of the Aviation Safety Affairs Sector of the UAE GCAA. If I can introduce you, sir, a little bit about your background. Mr. Ismail is an aircraft engineer with a master's in aviation management from Coventry University and has graduated from the UAE's Government Executive Leadership Program. He's the chair of the ICAO Middle East Regional Aviation Safety Group and also member of the ICAO SMP Group, GCC Safety Committee and ACAC Safety Committee. He began his career as an aircraft engineer with Emirates Airlines in 1990 and joined the Civil Aviation Authority as an airworthiness inspector 20 years ago in 2001. He was promoted to the rank of Chief of Airworthiness prior to taking up his directorship with the GCAA. So it's with great pleasure for me to hand over to Mr. Ismail to continue the welcome address and present for us. Sir.
Good morning. Assalamu alaikum to all. It's good to see some familiar faces and maybe some other faces behind the masks that maybe they will be familiar. 2 years maybe have passed almost since, maybe 18 months since the last time I spoke in public. Today is, to me, is an important day. I met before starting one of the organizers and she was concerned about attendees and how successful the event will be. To me, I said, the fact that we are here today, the fact that we still want to meet, still want to continue business as usual, in spite of all the challenges, is a success by itself. So maybe we have many empty seats, but I think it is the filled ones that matter. So thank you for coming. I will try to make my presentation swift and quick. My mistake. I thought I'll be talking to a general audience, not an ATC specific audience.
Passengers. You only needed to verify a passport and visa for the passenger and essentially check them in. But now you need to check their health credentials, whether they have the right PCR test, whether it's valid for the duration the government wants, whether they meet the transit requirements, if there's any additional contact tracing forms or data that they need to fill out. So there's a whole host of new health-related processes that ground handlers need to ensure. And what's that doing is it's essentially adding additional processing time per passenger. So historically, if it took 2 minutes per passenger to check in, it's now increased 2 or 3 times. And that's going to have an impact as and when we restart the aviation industry, because with the limited infrastructure we have, with the new requirements of physical distancing, we just cannot process the same volume of passengers with these new additional requirements. So many stakeholders, including ground handlers, will need to get innovative and look at technology innovation, perhaps contactless solutions, or having passengers complete these travel requirements before they get to the airport. Sure. Absolutely. So there are many things that aviation stakeholders have done, right? So, for example, airports in the region have invested in UV technology to disinfect surfaces. Many of these stakeholders are also now tasked with disinfecting the most commonly used surfaces or those with high contact. In addition to that, many of them are investing in thermal screening equipment. But on the technology side for the airlines as well as the airports, you could look at a host of now digital applications that the industry is working on, including IATA, such as Travel Pass, which provides passengers, airlines, airports, and governments an informed decision-making ability. And it also gives passengers the ability to complete their testing, travel requirements, and provides them with a digital token for them to use across the touch points at an airport. So rather than the Well, as I mentioned, from our perspective, we're calling on all governments to recognize recommendations put in place by ICAO, WHO, as well as the industry, as to what the industry needs. So with respect to vaccine certificates, with respect to testing certificates, there's a host of material that both ICAO as well as the WHO have developed with respect to smart vaccination certificates or the visual data seals. So we're calling on governments to use a standard approach and not have different or varying regulations around the world, which most of the governments are adhering to, and only working together in a collaborative manner can we ensure a safe restart. Sure. So one of the first things early on in the pandemic that we had to focus on was to try and organize this information. The regulations and entry requirements are changing so rapidly. So the three, shall we say, big ticket items are quarantine, testing requirements, and then border policy. And what we did was we built upon decades of experience we've had managing a program known as Thematic, which historically has recorded visa and passport information, to also look at the health credentials. So now, if you go to IATATravelCenter.com, you're able
measures to control that risk. It's important to know that it is here, to me at least, I think, for the foreseen horizon, this is here to stay. I was talking to one of colleagues, I mean, he was coming in and I was following him, I didn't know where to come and where to go. And I told him the same way. If I told you 30 years ago you wanted to travel, all what you need to know to get is your luggage and your passport. And if I told you, you have to check if you have a toothpaste in your bag, you will laugh. But then a time came where, we all went screening through our carry-on luggage to make sure that we're not carrying a toothpaste. It became a reality. We fought it for some time, but then acceptance. Maybe the 4 stages of grief, as they say. So with Corona, with this, we are going to live with it. So we have to find ways to live with it, to control it. Important note, everyone is looking forward to travel. And that's important to us as an aviation industry. How the world was in 28. See the red, all shades of red are dominant. Then in July, you can see that some countries did something, but the darker red is more dominant. Now, today, we have moved from the extreme left to maybe somewhere between dark red and light red. I don't know what you call this color. And I mean, to me, it's a red color, another shade of red. The objective is that we should all move to the middle. the ban should not stay. And that's what we are preaching for with all countries and all international organizations and all events and all our communication and all our actions, that the ban is not going to help you. Look at UAE, look at other countries. We adopted a different model and it worked for us. It will work for you if you do the right things. And we understand the thing is, for us in the UAE, aviation is a priority. What we have learned from the pandemic is that the same way the medical infrastructure came a frontline issue, it became a survival issue, aviation is no longer seen as only an economic stream. It's also a strategic survival stream for our country, and I'm sure many other countries see it the same way. We do not live in an isolated cocoon. And what we want to see is people or countries moving more towards the middle. And eventually, maybe we have to live with yellow. And I don't think there will be a time when there is no measures. Not, as I said, in the foreseen future. So what is the way forward? The impact of aviation, I'm sure all of you are aviators and you can see our region was also one of the most hit. UAE was affected a lot. And we think that this is because of two main reasons. One is UAE aviation, we do not have domestic flights. So with the closures, domestic, even at regional level, like in Europe, for example, they have the European system was at one time one complete open bubble, for the lack of another word. For us, that was difficulties, and we were affected a lot. And then, because we rely on transferring people, that's the business model in the UAE, from east to west, west to east. And when the east closes, your business will be affected. When the west closes, your business will be affected. And unfortunately, there is no, harmonized way of the effect, as I said in the beginning. So we are going through this now. The good news is, maybe before getting to the good news, I just want to remind you, where were we before? Dubai Airport was the busiest. In 2020, we maintained to be the busiest, but then everyone else was suffering and we were also suffering. So it's not it's an indication, it's a fact, but that's not our aspiration. But we see that although despite all the challenges, we maintained our position, we think that we are ready for the opening up. And let's hope that whatever happens, we will maintain the momentum. Interesting figure. Unfortunately, this is the only slide I have about air traffic. So, statistics, numbers, you can see the sharp decline we had, and then the numbers started going up. In January, we were all hit, the world was hit by a second wave or a third wave, depending on which country you are, and limitations came back. And now we are somewhere near 40% of air traffic, but that's only one indicator. These are the aircraft movements into the UAE. The thing is, if you look at these numbers and compare them to this, we got the aircraft movement, but we didn't get the passengers. And that's, how long can the aviation sector continue or survive under this kind of environment? We were, I think the best was in December, and then the numbers kept going up and down. And April, I'm sure you will see these numbers reducing, the effect of the closure of the subcontinent, flights from the subcontinent. But I feel that there will be some good news with all the info, the news we're getting from Europe about the opening up and the vaccines being credited or accepted. And that's another issue I'm going to talk about. And then there is also the cargo. Cargo, if you look at any balance sheet of any airline today, cargo, which was a complementary operation, is a central operation. I know Emirates Airline have converted some of their 777s to cargo, a good number. They call it the mini cargo, which is basically it's not, by design cargo operation. There's limitation on how much they can carry, but it's a revenue stream at these times. Many operators started carrying cargo on passenger seats. Can you imagine that? The passenger seat, which was the rarest commodity, now is being used to carry mango cases from India, or tough times for aviation. Where do we stand? It's not just aviation. It's from the beginning, UAE took an approach. I was part of the team from day one, and the instructions were always, your first priority is saving lives. Your second priority is saving lives. Your 10th priority is saving lives. But while doing this, put an eye on other things. We have seen how all countries have adapted to the pandemic, what measures were taken, and we are proud that for us, we maintained the death, total number of deaths or the percentage of death at a very low level. While also effect on GDP was controlled. There is always a compromise, and I believe that the school of thought that we followed in the UAE was the most suitable to us. We expect now that with the changes that I'm going to talk about now, which most of you already know, we are going to move on into the other aspects of the GDP. Effect in aviation. One of the things that we followed from the beginning was testing, and we were preaching for testing. We're talking to everyone that, the cheapest way, the most efficient way, other than complete lockdown. Lockdown is very expensive, and it will only push the hit, flatten the curve, but you will still be affected by the vaccine. Because you cannot lock down forever. The moment you open, you will be affected, and you can see around the world countries that took a very strict lockdown measure. All what they did was they delayed the effect. Maybe that was suitable for them. For us, we adopted a measure of monitoring. We kept looking at the numbers of infections coming to UAE, and depending on the rating, you can see we have countries in red, yellow. So we monitor. We applied, for those who are familiar with the safety system, and this is, by the way, it's a health. All these numbers are health related. They are infection related. They're not aviation safety affected, but we were managing it. The data is collected by us from the health authorities. We do the analysis, the GCA, and we then share it back with the authorities which make decisions with our recommendations. And we have countries at, if you're familiar with the ALOSP system, at level 1, alert level 1, alert level 2, alert level 3, and depending on the alert level, we will deal with it. So we tried that whatever we do is a performance-based, is preemptive, and I think it was working for us. If you look at the numbers here, these are the infection rate, and these are the actual infection rate at the airport from the test programs. At one stage, we were at 82, went down to 75, and if you can correlate the ratio with what's happening in the world. In March, we went to 72. In April, 1.66. That's why we had to take the measures with the subcontinent. And it was based on actual numbers of infections coming to UAE, compared to also what's happening in the country. And today, we are at 0.28. There's a price we had to pay to get to 0.28. We had to stop the flights from the most important feeder to the aviation system. But then, as I said in the beginning, our objective is to strike the balance, but with our 10 priority from 1 to 10 is saving lives. That's why we never hesitated to take any action when we had to take the action. Now, yeah, exactly. Whenever I look at this slide, I don't know where exactly should I start from. I think the most important part is this will walk you through what's happening in the UAE. You can see the blue color, the biggest peak, and then the orange color, infection, death. And in February, somewhere, okay, there's a pointer but doesn't point. Somewhere towards the end of February, the numbers started going down. You know what happened here? This is where the vaccine effect started kicking. If you live in the UAE, there was no lockdown. There was technically no additional social measures. There was an awareness campaign. The measures that were there, we started populating it. We started talking in the media about enforcement, and when somebody does something, he's out in the media. The Dubai municipality started declaring every day 10 violations, 50 violations, Abu Dhabi, everybody. There was a campaign of awareness. But the main reason why we have this decline is the vaccine, and that's good news. You know, that's good news. When we were doing the vaccine, I was like, we were checking every week other countries, the effect on other countries. Are the numbers reducing? You know, because that's our only savior. If the vaccine doesn't work, we are doomed forever. And this to me, being a health expert like everybody else in the room, it's a very good indication. We are up for good news. Interesting is the yellow line. These are the stringency measures. Yeah, stringency measure. I'm not sure if this is even an English word. This was written by my colleague Murad, who is French. So, stringency measures. And we achieved the reduction in numbers without adding stringency measures. If you follow the CDC, yesterday, the day before, they were talking about do not wear masks. So, and you can see that states are pushing this because we need to move on from where we are. We need to go back to normality, or the redefined state of normality, whatever that is. Another good indication. This is a statistic that you can pull from Google data somehow. Again, it is retail and recreation. So they follow, I think the way it works is they follow the mobile Google map data, your feed to the GPS, and they see how are people moving out and in and where are they going up to some extent. And you can see in February 2020, the drop that happened. And in the United States, nothing happened. We know who we should blame for that. Then you can see the normality, how we're going back to normal. And today, in the UAE, we are back to the pre-pandemic levels of retail and recreation, basically the people's movement. And that was only, or could never be achieved without all the measures that have been taken. But I think key is the vaccine. Other countries slowly are picking up, and you can always correlate that with the vaccination rate. I am a safety man. I don't know why this slide is there, but I have to remind everyone where we come from. And this is the Swiss cheese model. We started from extreme right. emergency response. Then we moved into the clinical management. The world have the same step followed by everybody, trying to save lives through clinical interference. Then preventive measures, testing, contact tracing, quarantine, hand hygiene, personal measures, all these things, social distancing, awareness. But your final savior is the vaccine. What this tells you is, even with the vaccine back, you still need to maintain everything else. And that's where I said, the normality, when we say normal, back to normal, it has been redefined. Lesson learned. As civil aviation, we are the most vulnerable sector in the economy. Anything happens anywhere in any sector, civil aviation is affected. With Corona, we were the most affected. What we have learned is to get out of any pandemic like this, it's collaboration. Collaboration at the airport level, collaboration between the airport management, the air traffic controllers, the airlines, collaborating at the state level, at the aviation sector in the state, collaboration at the state level with health authorities, with the emergency response people, with other authorities, collaboration between states at regional level, and international collaboration. That's the only way for things to go back. And you can see that some countries took very stringent measures. They have built a wall around them. They're not interested in anybody coming to them. And it's going to affect us. Isolated actions are not the solution. We can work together in finding better actions. Infection rate was a good representation at one stage. Today, it's not infection rate if you want to decide on where does a country stands. And we felt that UAE became a victim of that in mid of last year when Europe started categorizing countries, and UAE was in the red. While we know, everyone knows, that we were way ahead of them in the control of the virus. But then our numbers were higher. Our numbers were higher because we were doing 100,000 tests a day, while a big country, maybe 50 times the size of UAE, was doing the same number. So you cannot compare apple to apple when it comes to infection rate. But however, that was the way things were done then, until today also. The unfortunate news that some countries have decided to leave UAE on the red category because people are coming on UAE operators from other infected countries. We took measures. We do not want someone to come to us from an infected country. We ban him from coming. Anyone who was there in 14 days is banned. Airlines will follow your instructions. We have no problem with that. So nobody is coming to UAE from a banned country via another country. Maybe they're coming, but it's a very limited number. When country A didn't declare that you do not want anyone from India, you cannot blame the industry for bringing people from India, for example. And there will be new factors. We should be ready that the virus have proven to be very difficult to manage. And we should be ready to adapt to the changes. Challenges: trust and numbers. Trust in the numbers declared. Many countries are declaring numbers which are not representative of what's happening there. Not necessarily because they do not want to declare the right numbers, but simply because they cannot measure what's happening with them. I think the key challenge of the next era is the vaccine recognition. Vaccine politics is not good. And what we can see is Many countries have adopted a measure where they will only accept vaccines that are produced by them or recognized by them. And there will not be a time when all countries will have a common platform for every vaccine. Some different measures should be applied. We all hear about the vaccine passport. Maybe you think of it as a solution. I see it as a problem. If countries start issuing vaccines passport and they will not recognize other vaccines given by other countries, then we are up for a long run. Mutation of the virus and the long-term effectiveness of the vaccine. UAE just announced that you can take a third shoot or a booster shoot. Conclusion. Nobody wants to return to the lockdown situation. Everyone wants to reinstate cross-border movements. But then different countries have different priorities. If you talk to anyone, they want to open their borders. But then they have other priorities, and the decision is not with the aviation community. We are back to normalcy, not 100%, but we're getting there thanks to the vaccine effectiveness. So the vaccine is working, regardless of what other people say. Just look at the numbers. I don't need to be a scientist to tell you that the vaccine is actually working. We are in the recovery mood. Our aviation is in the recovery mood. Instead of all what's happening in the world, the numbers were not good. You remember we were standing at 20 or 200,000, is it, or 2 million a month? Somewhere around 2. And we didn't dip. The number of passengers is holding. And that's good. I wish Bitcoin does that. And this is as good as it will get. With all the measures that we have taken, it will not go, I don't think it will go any more than that. For the numbers to increase, for our percentage to increase, for us to recover, what we need to see is the world. Other countries should open up. And as I said in the beginning, while we can see in the East there is more stringent actions, I think in the West things are opening up and easing up, and I hope that this will change our perspective. We all know it's more stronger and better and more convincing if you say it in French. My French is not that good, so it's no longer COVID that kills. It is fear that's killing us. It is fear that's killing the joy of life. And we have to cross that fear bridge. We have reasons. Now, as I said in the beginning that we were dealing with an unknown risk. Today we're dealing with a known risk, and we need to work with it. I mean, now I've reached the end of my presentation. I said, stay safe, and thank you.
Mr. Ismail Al-Balushi, ladies and gentlemen, just one more time, please give a warm round of applause. Thank you, sir, for the inspiring welcome address. I think it has provided inspiration for the rest of the forum, and I think there was direct relevance to all of us in ANS in that presentation. Thank you, sir, for that. I'd like to move on. It's my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, Mr. Yahya Al-Hamadi. He's the CEO of Global Air Navigation Services based in Abu Dhabi. He'll be presenting a paper on securing your airspace in digital times. Mr. Al-Hamadi is a deeply experienced, dedicated, results-driven business leader. He's got over 30 years of local and international experience with a long and distinguished career in the UAE Armed Forces, culminating as a brigadier and working with the Ministry of Defense. Moved to the private sector, and he currently leads Global Air Navigation.
So yes, the operation has significantly changed. In passenger service, obviously, you now have the glass barrier. the glass barriers or the plastic barriers on the check-in counters. You have more push towards remote or self-service or self-check-in and bag drop facilities. You have all the checks on the documentation that I've alluded to before. And then you have the cleaning of the aircraft, which takes a much higher effort than it was before, and it takes specialized equipment or fluids to that extent that are effective against virus and residue in order to make sure that the passenger has the confidence that everything possible has been done to ensure that he can travel safely and that his fellow passengers are similarly safe. And so that obviously had a massive impact, and therefore turnaround times that we have seen before the crisis right now in this scenario are simply not realistic. The turnaround times have increased, and a number of countries have even regulated this by declaring certain minimum turnaround times. In other cases, the airlines have agreed with their service providers to extend the ground time in order to allow the time, for example, for aircraft cleaning. And this also pertains not only to whatever is visible to the passenger, to the traveling public, but obviously also we need to ensure that our staff can be confident that the companies do whatever is possible in order to keep them safe, because obviously the staff at a melting pot that an airport is very much exposed to all kinds of
Their collaboration across border and innovative technological development and commercial competition. So these are the main subjects that will secure the industry in this challenging time, which I will touch on them. Cost effectiveness is a major pillar of the post-pandemic recovery. As airlines and aviation businesses, airports build their operation, although significant steps have already been made, like deferment of en route charges to airlines in Europe, also increasing credit periods, all these things, but we still need a paradigm shift is required to reduce the NSPs and to ensure that NSPs are focused on initiative that increases efficiency and reduce the overall cost of operation. Areas such as staff productivity requires detailed analysis. NSP's capital investment in infrastructure is another area of focus, as better and more streamlined standards and recommended practices along stronger economic regulation of original equipment manufacturer to reduce cost and improve interoperability. The relationship between ANSPs and their airport and airline customers need to be transformed to performance-based. This transformation will help drive scalability, which will be responsive to meet the needs of customers in terms of efficient operation and cost effectiveness. In terms of collaboration, it's in our industry we always talk about safe and expeditious flow of traffic, which is based on 3 key pillars: safety, resilience, and efficiency. With the challenges we are currently facing as an industry, there is need for greater collaboration across border. In non-traditional areas, such as regulation, standards, and technology solution, today, real meaning cross-border collaboration is limited mainly to letters of engagement or letter of agreement to support movement of traffic across FIR boundaries. This is the only collaboration. We need to go beyond these things, as I mentioned. More cooperation would benefit the wider industry, like a group of European ANSP COPANs have pooled resources together to procure an ATM system, which is used across 6 countries, showing that ANSPs, 6 ANSPs can partner to operate a world-class, safe, and cost-effective ATM system, which is typically the highest capital expenditure of ANSPs. So the strategy of economies of scale This will drive the cost down of the NFC's operators and service delivery. In safety critical and rightly heavily regulated, now I will touch on the technology. Industry is no surprise because of the regulation. It is no surprise that changes in the air traffic industry lag behind many other industries. But disruption with the introduction of the space-based ADSB, automatic dependent surveillance broadcast, for with we have the system Aireon satellite constellation and the concept of virtual centers, which can be applied en route and aerodrome operation with remote towers. So these are the two technology that we'll talk about. With only 30% radar coverage today around the world, ADSB provides 100 coverage if we embrace this, adopt it, which is groundbreaking and revolutionary, with the potential to eliminate procedural separation over busy oceanic routes. There is the possibility to increase capacity. To be cost effective, there is a strong argument that at least 2 ADSB solutions are required to support the NSP and wider aviation, since we have only one for currently. Today, through innovative technology, super fast fiber networks and high definition cameras, we are seeing a revolution in air traffic management, with services traditionally provided from a control tower now being provided from hundreds, even thousands of miles away from remote digital control centers, with enhanced controller situation awareness, efficiency, and safety. So remote digital towers are now being rolled out at a slow but increasing rate around the world. London City Airport being the most recent deployment. With the greater acceptance of towers going digital, a key question is how we accelerate this adoption and implementation to reduce cost and unlock the additional benefits which can be realized from remote control towers. Unified traffic management, which is commonly known as UTM, which sees the integration of drones now into the airspace, is another area of interest where regulatory support and greater industry collaboration is required to establish industry standards for service providers and original equipment manufacturers to support a growing industry. This collaboration will answer difficult questions such as whether there needs to be a phased approach from pilot-operated drones to autonomous drones in order to meet stringent safety standards and requirements. So space-based ADSB, remote digital centers, and unified traffic management will all play a part in a sustainable recovery of the industry. For now, the commercial competition, there is ample evidence which proves that market competition drives down cost, delivers improvement, and provides a better experience for the customer and the end user. It is for this reason that we need governments and regulators to open up the industry to promote competition in air navigation service provision. We know that this competition is already happening with service provision at some airports around the world, but there is potential for more airports to open up their service provision to competition. En route service provision to competition remains close to competition. While this is understandable due to the national security consideration associated with the airspace, it is not inconceivable for appropriate management and coordination to be implemented, which could support seamless national security consideration. So there is a potential that increased competition could increase en route service efficiency, reducing delays and en route charges paid by airlines. A greater service delivery competition could be a good catalyst to support the recovery of the industry post-pandemic. In post-COVID-19, the adoption of as I mentioned, innovative technology development, greater collaboration, and commercialization will all play efficient part in enabling ANSP's reduce costs to support a sustainable and efficient recovery of the aviation industry. With this, I conclude my speech about the main subjects that will sustain the recovery of our aviation industry. Thank you very much for your attention.
Moving
Your Excellencies, fellow speakers, and dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and sabah al-khair. It's a pleasure to be able to come to Dubai after such a long period of isolation. A feeling of belonging and pride overcame me when I landed at DXP yesterday. The smiling faces of the Emirates staff greeted me. The beautiful and well-maintained sky bridges and gates. The beautiful surroundings of TR3. The mall that puts all real malls to shame, as we all know at DXP. The customs gates and the e-gates that are so well maintained by the custodial staff at DXP that the glass seems invisible and the chrome glistens with a blinding light reflection. Then I reached the baggage carousels, directed by an electronic display leading me to the correct carousel where my bags await. Of course, I did not need the display to tell me which carousel had my bags. I was able to see that from my seat on the Emirates 777 even before we landed. As I exited the terminal, security personnel also made me feel secure and welcome. Even my transportation to my hotel was ready, making the end of my journey as comfortable and worry-free as possible. So, as I sat composing and contemplating my address to you with the title of Envisioning Airports of the Future, it occurred to me that Dubai in general and DXP in particular have already shown us what the way airports of the future should look like and feel like. We have GCAA, Dubai Airports, Dubai Air Navigation Services, and EP to thank for their exceptional experience we encountered when we come to Dubai. Their constant evaluation, study, and innovation has established Dubai as the standard of excellence in aviation. The secret why these organizations have been so successful in Dubai is because they never stop thinking of ways to improve their systems, their business structures, and their assets to provide the unique experience those passengers get to encounter when they land in Dubai. So what will the future of airports look like? I can tell you what we at Saab, Air Traffic Management, have been working on with our eye focused on the future. This COVID timeout has allowed us to rethink how things are done in airports environments. So we posed a few questions to ourselves. What could be done to improve the efficiencies in airports while enhancing customer experience and improve safety? How do we do that without adding additional systems to an already complex environment? How do we ensure that all new solutions are not disruptive, but adaptive to the place that Dubai Airport has arrived at? What if we integrate all these solutions that uses these massive amount of data in all airside and terminal systems to provide a situational awareness to all the stakeholders at the airport ecosystem? From aircrafts and airlines to baggage handlers, catering and fueling, to customs, maintenance, security, and fire personnel. How do we do that? Not by adding another system, but by integrating the existing systems so as to not to change the operational procedures for all these entities and stakeholders. Rather, make them aware of what's taking place by using the same music sheet as all the other stakeholders and at this very large and extremely complicated environment. In other words, a common, fully integrated situational display. The benefit of having ATC aware of incoming and outgoing flights and even a system to plan for gate and taxi space is essential in today's complicated airports. What if we can share this data with, say, customs, allowing them to plan on how many kiosks open based on how many aircrafts are truly arriving on time? What if we let emergency dispatch communicate with security, fire, custodians on the same platform, allowing them to handle incidences seamlessly while alerting all the stakeholders of what is going on and what steps needs to be taken using pre-established business responses? What if parking garages were alerted to the need for increased resources before the traffic jam, thereby improving passenger experience? These are not landside, terminal, or airside issues. These are holistic airport issues. This is what we see as airports of the future: an integrated journey, seamless to the customer, efficient to all the stakeholders, with reports to management, full of business analytics, using all this big data that can pinpoint deficiencies and suggest alternate solutions for future applications. We at Saab call that TAM, Total Airport Management. It might be coming to an airport near you. And if history of Dubai is any indication, that airport will be here, keeping Dubai the leader in the aviation and innovation. Thank you for inviting me and listening to me. Have a good and a show and conference.
Ladies and gents, another round of applause for Mr. David Shomar. Thank you, sir, for the wonderful presentation and welcome back to Dubai. Ladies and gents, we have a panel session now. I'd like to welcome the team for the first panel session. It's going to be covering the topic, the future of smart digital towers. The panel session will be going on for approximately an hour.
secure comparing to the conventional control towers. Also, they can provide the ATC services for a remote aerodrome where a local or dedicated ATC service may not be sustainable or cost effective. So with that, I would like to come to our panelists for today, who are industry leaders from the major ATM providers. The topic for our discussion, of course, is the future of the smart digital towers, where these industry leaders have been working innovative ideas and solutions to provide the remote aerodrome services from their technologies. Our first guest speaker and panelist is Mr. David Shomar, who is the Vice President of Civil Security for Saab, Middle East and Africa region. Please welcome on stage, please. Our second speaker is Mr. Peter Gridling. He's the Vice President Sales for Frequentis DFS Aerosense. Please welcome on stage. And we have a speaker joining virtually, remotely, Mr. Andrew Fiamingo. He's the CEO of Indra. So this is the first time I'm doing Here we would like to understand what are the regulatory challenges that one could face while implementing these digital remote towers into our domain. So maybe David, I could start with yourself and then we'll just go around, please, yeah?
First, Andrew, it's good to see you. At Saab, we established a company called SDATS, Saab Digital Air Traffic Systems. SDATS is a conglomerate of both Saab and LFV, which is the ANSP in Sweden. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to be able to get to regulators like GCAA and tell them the story of how we got to the through the certification process when we install our digital towers. Basically, the concept of certification goes through safety cases. And as Mikkel, who was our project manager for the first remote tower, he was chosen because he was an air traffic controller that absolutely did not believe that you can control aircrafts with cameras. So he was completely against the whole idea, and we chose him as the project manager. Because if we can convince him that it works, then you know it's going to do. And he's become a completely changed person. He keeps pointing to about 1.5 meters high worth of safety cases that they have gone through in order to do that, in order to get to the certification process. So it took a long time. We were the first to have a system that's certified for operation. But we bring those safety cases with us to the regulators to help them go through that. And then LFV, having been the actual ANSP for that first certification, holds their hand. That's why the importance of getting the two companies together, holds their hand through the process, of course with the leadership GCAA has to provide, but we will tell them the steps we went through. We already have a lot of the safety cases there that we can show them. We can build on those safety cases for the requirement that GCAA still has. So between an ANSP and an equipment supplier and provider, we have an actual nice combination to get us through a very difficult process. Lastly, I would say I go back to the words that we talked about at the beginning of this concept, which is our technology required that we are an adaptive technology, not a disruptive technology. That's why it's important, like Andrew said and like Peter said, that we keep, at this stage, the operational procedures the same for the current environment. Now, as we learn, as the new kids, Peter, come on, right, and they are so easy at touching screens and moving things around, well, then things might change, but then it's adapting to the new people, and it can carry through with always the security and safety being the #1 thing in the mind of the regulators, as well as the mind of the air traffic controllers. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. No, it does. Andrew, if you could please, and then I'll come to Peter over here. Please.
Yes. So one of the challenges with regulation today is actually written in ICAO, and it has to do with the final approach of aircraft into an airport and the requirement for visual prior to landing. I was at a remote tower conference in Sweden about 3 or 4 years ago. This was a very hot topic at that time. And to show you how fast this industry moves, these regulations have not been changed yet. And that's just an example of this building the safety case that we have to do is for a reason. We know that air traffic is the safest form of transport in the world, and it's based on the fact that we make sure that the regulations are correct. But as these new technologies come in, we need to see a faster change and adaptation in order to embrace these new technologies.
Good, thanks. Peter, please.
Yeah, we at Frequentis, we also found a joint venture together with DFS, Deutsche Flugsicherung, the German ANSP, to address exactly the regulatory topics. We have gone through the process together in our first project, and in the meanwhile, we have executed projects in 8 different countries, and of course, the regulators in those countries have quite different demands, and by collecting such an experience, we are able now to bring that experience with us to support the NSP when he wants to implement remote tower in his country, and to deal with the regulator and together to define the safety cases, but also all the other documentation which is needed to implement remote tower successfully.
Good, thank you. I think one of the things that I would like to touch upon, I mean, we have been hearing, at least in the UAE, and I talk for myself at least, that these remote tower, digital tower technologies are for smaller airports, and the big airports are not ready yet to adapt to this change. So from the ATM provider's perspective, could you please at least share your implementations existing right now and where they are and how big of the environment that you are controlling using the respective technologies that you have available? So David, if you may start,
Sure.
please. Yeah.
If you'd asked me that question 3 years ago, I would have a list of 4 or 5 airports where we did this. Now, it's hard for me to even remember all the airports that we have done this at. As Peter mentioned, different ANSPs in different countries have different, not requirements, but they have different way of doing things, right? And you have to meet the customer's needs. You have to not hold their hand, but show them that your system will not jeopardize their operation. And we've been very successful at doing that. So we go from small airports like Örnsköldsvik in Sweden, and how we can now control 3 or 4 airports from our airport control center in Sweden at the same location, to places like Cork and Shannon in Ireland that are controlled out of Dublin, a little bit bigger airports, but still relatively small. Then we go to LVNL that took over our system and stuff, and they're using it for different particular operations and maybe some concepts. And then we started going into the US, and in the US, it's different the way that they handle airports, as we know. Everything in the US is different. What the airlines in the US control the gates, and they control the movements out of the gates. So they are in charge of that. And our system for collaborative decision-making, Aerobahn, has been extremely successful in helping the airlines manage their operations and become very efficient, cut the carbon footprint, do all sorts of things, D-man, all that type of stuff, part of Aerobahn. But because they had Aerobahn, they wanted to add also our digital tower to replace their tower for the movement area. So one, it controls, it no longer needs the big footprint that is required, but it also made it collaborative for all the people that are working together. They're in the same environment, and they felt like it's a brand new thing to do. And that all of a sudden has become really big. So we have them in Houston, we have them in Orlando, we have them all different those locations. And these are big airports. And then came, lastly, London City Airport, which we just got certified. Our system is installed there. And it's in operation. And certification in the UK is not an easy thing. But London City Airport is a good-sized airport. I wouldn't consider that one comparable to DXB by any stretch of the imagination, or Heathrow, as we know. But it is a very unique environment. It is constrained geographically, so it has a one runway surrounded by water, right? And because of that, and because of the size of what it is, this worked just right for them. So now the industry is starting to get more comfortable with the fact that this system is actually capable of controlling large and more complex operations and more complex airports. I can't tell you where we're headed next. My competition is here, but we are working on much even larger airports than that. And I think that in the future, we all will be at large airports as we come along. And we will carry through with our innovation in this kind of field to make particularly the regulators and then the air traffic controllers feel safe, that the passengers are safe in the hands of digital towers.
Thank you. So Peter, without sharing the competition story, you can at least share your experiences where you have it working right now.
Yeah, I think because of the pioneering work of all of us, it's in the meanwhile accepted that remote towers, remote digital towers are safe for small airports, but also for large airports. So we are operating a digital tower system at Vienna Airport since 2016 without any incidents. So they are using it on a daily basis for airport control. And during the time, they have learned to get the most out of it. So at the beginning, they only used it for airport control. But in the meanwhile, they're using it for different stakeholders. They are providing the data to this security operation center. They are providing it to the fire station, also to the operational center. So here they have learned by the time how to use this new technology. And in the meanwhile, it's a big tool where Vienna Airport itself says they won't, if they wouldn't have it, they would have an efficiency problem. So that, especially at large airports, the technology itself helps to make operations more efficient. And I only give one example. The collaboration between the ANSP and the airport control, for example, is fully automated. So here they say by itself they could increase the capacity by 20% only by doing the communication in a digital form and not as in the past by radio. And only with that single feature they could increase the efficiency by 20%, and that's amazing, I think.
Thank you. Andrew, your turn to share your story.
Yes. So the concept of digital towers, the way that we see them today, has also changed. But let's go back to 2007, for example. A backup tower, it's called a virtual control facility, is owned by NATS for London Heathrow's airport, and it doesn't have out-the-window capability. So there are no video cameras, there is no out-the-window glass tower. It manages up to 70% of the air traffic. That was supplied by Indra. So this is already going back at a major airport, one of the world's largest airports. There is a form of remote tower without a visual capacity. Moving on from that, we've done a lot of work with Hungaro Control, as everyone will know. Medium-sized airport where, in fact, the footprint of the tower is owned by the airport's company, and the ANSP has to pay a large sum of money annually to rent the property. So they want to move their capability into their control center, which is next to the airport. But this whole idea of remote towers is also, as my colleagues have said, varies. It's not just for small or for large airports. There are very many different applications. Another application that we're very proud of in Norway is a remote tower program which is going to house 15 airports in one control center. Today, we already control 4. Following summer this year, that's going to be increased to 6, and that's operational. So that's completely certified. And we're also excited about the CESAR trials for multi-mode, which are ongoing at the moment, which we're all involved in. These have been very positive. And the program in Norway, the Linux program for remote towers, its benefit is absolutely going to multiple tower operations. That means that one controller will comfortably be able to manage 3 different airports at any one time. But again, this is for a lower volume of traffic. So the application of remote towers, it's adaptable and it's there ready for whatever the customer's operational needs are.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. I think one of the the topics, which is a buzzword right now, is the drones and the UTM. And we're very curious to understand how these digital remote technologies are taking the drones and UTM into consideration, because it is a challenge. In certain technologies, in the radars and other systems, there's a challenge. Is there a better way where the future digital towers are going to be able to manage these drones or the UTM into the system? So Peter, I would like to start with yourself, please.
Well, let's have a look from the controller's perspective. So drones for a controller are basically a threat and additional workload. So that's a fact, that's quite simple. So handling UTM traffic in a conventional environment, maybe without digital systems and maybe only a voice communication system, can be extremely stressful for the controller. So basically, the digitalization and the digital tower makes it much more easier to integrate drone traffic into the normal operations of an air traffic controller, because basically drones are quite small. So especially when they're operating at the airport, they are hardly seen by the controller, so or also by the cameras. So for that's simply a fact. And of course, they are a threat if they don't behave as they should. So, and by integrating the UTM systems and the drone detection systems directly into the digital environment of a remote tower, it makes much easier for the controller to deal with this traffic, and on the other hand, it also makes the operations much more safe than in a conventional tower.
Thank you. Andrew, why don't I come to you, please? Yeah.
So building on that, Peter, if we take the concept of CDM, collaborative decision making, CDM is an idea, as it says, is to collaboratively make decisions. And drone traffic management is going to be a form of air traffic control, not commercial air traffic control, but air traffic control in a separate way. And when you consider that you need to have some kind of system that ultimately needs to be autonomous. We can't have air traffic controllers controlling drone traffic. Drone traffic has to be automated, and these are technologies that we're all working on currently. But when you consider that there's this automation and autonomous use, but you still have to manage the exceptions, you start to see that you have an air traffic system or a tower for an airport, you have a drone traffic system, and you need to bring these together. So CDM in its current form for an airport operation, we see is going to become, there's going to be new acronyms to be used in order to bring these kind of service centers together. So shared service centers where traffic control is managed is definitely the way that this is going to go. And we're not talking about the next 5 to 10 years, we're talking beyond that. But we can see that the drone traffic is coming. There's been a lot of hype over the last couple of years, but regulation, I'm not even going to start on the regulation for UTM. We'll leave that to David or to the next question.
David, you're the expert by Andrew, so please go ahead.
Very good, Andrew. Nice job. So Saab's way of thinking about UTM, I'm going to tell you how we deal with it, which is close to what Peter said, actually. But I also want to tell you a little story about how we got to where we were. So the way we deal with UTM is exactly that. This is a digital system. We use the concept of collaborative decision making, but it's mainly a system of systems, so we can include any detection technology for drones as part of this system and make it available for the controllers to do it. Whether the controllers are the sole controllers of the drones, Andrew, or not, they have the capability of knowing what's going around in their own airspace. And you do that one because this is a digital system and it takes in surveillance information. So we do exactly what Peter mentioned, which is we integrate that stuff into it. And we can also develop additional integrations into that situation. But the nice story that Saab came through with respect to drones is this. When we first came up with the concept of digital towers, we wanted to take a picture of what we call our bird cage, which is the 14 cameras that's on top that actually give the 360-degree view. So in order to do that and put it on a brochure, we were still thinking brochures at the time, right? We sent a drone to take a picture of the actual housing. Wouldn't you know it, our system detected the drone, because our system is, you know, with the pixels that you have, it's so sensitive. We have very high, what they call FPS, okay, which is, it's a term basically in the number of frames per second, right? So the high quality of the cameras and the high quality of the screens that we have, our system can detect any 4 pixels that has a movement on it. It puts a square around it and says, you got something moving in your airspace. So it detected it because there was some movement in space. It put a square around it, and all of a sudden we saw it. So we determined that our system can actually detect drones. Now, what is that? How far away? How big are the drones? Well, the drone was about this size at the time. Now drones could be this size, right? But the drones it was about 0.5 meter by 0.5 meter, say. And we were able to detect a drone that is 1 meter by 1 meter if it's 3 kilometers away from where the camera is. So that was how we entered into drone detection within the digital towers, or at the time we called it remote towers and the like. But that's not the way it's going to be. You're going to look at drones not only for determining that there's a drone in your airspace, which is very good. The big problem is, as we all know, is what do you do about it once you determine it is in your airspace? And that is, that's a different subject, much more complicated. But we have systems now, we have radar specifically for drone detection, and they are integrated into our digital tower.
Excellent, thank you. I've got 2 more questions, I think, and then I will probably come to the audience if you may have any question, or people who have joined us virtually. Talking about the digital towers, one important thing that we get to hear constantly is it is less costly. The footprint is smaller. But when we are looking at the technologies that need to go in and the facilities that need to be built in certain cases separately, the cost may or may not be that significantly cheaper. So from your perspective and experiences, what's your view on the cost? Is it really cheap, or is it going to be cheaper at some point, or is it going to go up? So Peter, if I may start with you, please.
Well, I think at the long term, it's definitely cheaper. Of course, in the first step, it's an investment, but everybody has to understand that the system costs are not the big factor in a remote tower project, because you have to consider that also the ANSP has to deal with it, so he has to train the controllers, he has to implement it, he has to evaluate the system. So basically what we have seen is that when you're starting a remote tower project, so up to 70% of the costs are on the ANSP side, not on the system side. So on the system side, the system is significantly cheaper than building a new concrete tower, for example. So that's no way. So it's important to understand that if you just implement one single remote tower, then it will be really hard to have a positive business case within a few years. But if you're thinking about a complete rollout for a country, then quite fast you are achieving your return of investment, and then really for the long term it's a perfect investment to reduce the operational costs, but of course also the investment costs.
Andrew, what's your view?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and Peter really has hit the nail on the head. There is an economy of scale relative to the number of tower systems. We have experienced similar percentages in terms of the cost for a total remote tower program. Between 50 and 70% could be the ANSP's cost, training, establishment of the procedures, and so forth. But you also, and of course, replacing either building new towers or replacing towers. But there are other added benefits which come with these remote tower technologies and programs. You've got to consider the fact that we were in earlier, that you're going to have controllers who are qualified for several airports in one location. You're not you're not reliant on having a full staff to supply or to offer a remote tower service at a small remote airport. When you have a center, you have many controllers qualified at different airports, and it's a much cheaper way of running your operations.
Thank you. David, please.
Well, I think to answer this question completely, I think we need to break around small remote airports from large, medium-sized airports. And the reason I say that is because the whole concept that Saab was asked to do at the beginning, how we came up with remote towers, was because we wanted to make it not cheaper, but less expensive to run remote airports. And so it was built into the system that it needs to be less expensive. So yes, it is less expensive to run a remote airport using digital towers. That was the basis of the design. So I can honestly say that when we look at the ROIs and when LFV looked at the ROIs, it was obvious, very much so, that it was less expensive. As for larger airports and medium-sized airports, we have ROI studies that show, in theory, because the concept of applying them yet is still in its infancy, in theory that they can get return on investment in a very short period of time, say 5 years. And it's based on many things. It's based on, one, yes, if you're building a new tower now, physical new tower, versus putting in cameras, you can easily see that there's a savings there, right? But we're talking about something else. We're talking about, what if we're replacing an existing, already built-in structure with a remote or digital tower, right? So they've already paid for that. But there's the cost of maintaining that. There's the cost of renovating that. You're going through that one right now at Dubai, right? So the cost of renovating that one is also very expensive. So it stands to reason that there should be a less expensive way of doing it with the digital towers. The additional thing that the airports benefit from is that you have a footprint for the actual towers. And we know how footprints at an airport are extremely expensive. Now you can use that for additional things, expansion of your terminals, additional taxiways to improve the flow in your airport and the like. So I can honestly say that looking at the figures that we've seen, your ROI is excellent for digital towers, but it's yet to be proven physically for large and medium-sized airports, which we're working on.
Thank you. I think you've answered very well. Thanks. That's a question that I get to ask very often, and honestly, I just cannot justify that. So that helps. I would like to come to the concluding question, and then I'll open the floor for any question there might be. Andrew, if I may, what is the long-term vision for these smart digital towers from the technology perspective or ATM provider perspective? Because we are at the receiving end and we are looking at only the remote towers. But the topic that we are discussing today are the smart digital towers, which is a bit more than that. So what is the long-term vision for this from your perspective?
So at Indra, we've been in air traffic management for decades. And the digital towers, as I mentioned earlier, we have them. All the technology providers have digital towers today. But the smart part comes in with a lot of automation in terms of machine learning, AI, and those kind of new technologies which need to be implemented in order to merge digital towers to make them smart. So in decades to come, we also see from a technology point of view that we have to move away from the historical monolithical systems which are being developed and delivered for air traffic control, and they need to become more agile. They need to be able to have the opportunity to be updated quicker, to be able to manage new improvements, new inputs, new sources of information quicker, so that they can keep up with the changes in the way that operations are going to change. We all know before the iPad was created, we spent time on the telephone. Before the iPad, we spent time on the internet doing banking. The iPad took everything and brought it into one piece of hardware in which you read your newspaper, you did your banking. So you have to be able to move a lot quicker than what we've experienced in the past. And it's moving quicker that's going to bring us to the smart part of digital towers. And this is where Indra is investing all their focus and time, is in terms of moving technologies forward much quicker.
David?
Saab's way of thinking about digital towers' future is really a little different. We, from the beginning, as I mentioned, we did not want this to be disruptive technology. We wanted it to be an adaptive technology. And so it's not that we're not thinking about enhancements for the digital tower to help air traffic controllers, but we are trying to make sure that we don't push particularly regulators and air traffic controllers beyond the limit of them accepting the new technology. The basis of air traffic has always been and should always be, and we heard it from the keynote speaker, safety first, safety second, and safety third. And therefore, we can't look at how we're going to move things and make them more efficient. You have to look at how we can move them while either enhancing or at least keeping safety where it is. So we don't want to push the envelope beyond that. Are we working on enhancements and different views? Yes, I addressed, I think, that one in my keynote speech, in which now we have what we call total airport management, which puts all of these systems, including the digital towers, into one system. That way, you are not basically changing the operational procedures. That's up to the regulators to do. It's not up to us suppliers to force them into doing it. They need to be comfortable with that. So we want everybody to be comfortable in moving forward. We don't want to stay where we are. But it's, I know I'm disagreeing with Andrew, and he's a good friend, and I don't mean about that, because Indra is a great company. But iPads are not air traffic control. iPads, everybody uses it, okay? And if you screw up your iPad, you do something wrong to your app, no big deal. We can't afford that one in air traffic control, and we look at it from that standpoint. That's what I would propose. That's what Saab is working towards.
Oh, that's great. I think it's good to have a bit of different approach to things. Obviously, that's why we're here, to listen to the industry experts and their views. So coming to yourself, Peter, what are your thoughts?
Well, Frequentis is working for years now on the concept of an integrated working position, and maybe with the Atrix TowerPad we have the iPod for ANSPs, but what we have also seen is that if we try to disrupt the evolution or the concept of air traffic control for now, then that doesn't work really. So basically our concept is to provide systems which are growing together with the customer, together with the controller. So we are starting small, and then we improve, we extend the system, so together with the controllers, so that they can gain the most benefit out of it.
Thank you. I think, from listening to all three of you, essentially you're saying the same thing, but some of you are taking a bit of conservative approach, and some of you are taking a bit of more ahead or less conservative approach, I would call it. But thanks for sharing that. So I think the takeaway from the discussion that at least I have is obviously these, from the cost perspective, there are business cases where it's less costly comparing to the conventional towers, and also the technology providers like yourself are working towards looking into the future where this technology needs to be. And not only the smaller airports are adapting to it, but it's moving towards the larger airports. And the future of the smart digital towers is bright, and we do look forward in the region to adapting to it. With that, I would like to come to our audience over here. If you may have any questions for our panelists, we have got roughly around 8 minutes left. So, yes, sir, please. We've got a mic right there. Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. Ahmed Sabri, Global Navigation Services. I'm Director Civil. In the UAE, we are outcome-oriented, and we want to start where other people ended. We have no time to reinvent the wheel. So if an open question to the three very experienced panelists from three industry-leading potential providers are asked, what is a reasonable time frame from start to end? Let's say we have a business case, we see the return of investment, and we have potential, for example, 3-4 small kind of potential providers for the first project to see the light, opening the door for the future. So, time frame, start to end, approximately, if we can get that information.
Thank you. I see that as a business opportunity for all three of you, huh? Andrew, why don't we start from you, and then we'll just come down here. Thanks. Thank you for the question.
So, an interesting question. As we've mentioned through the discussion today, two different aspects. One being technology provider. That's the three companies that you see here today. And then the other one is the implementation of the operations and to get the approval from the regulator. So, typically, again, depending on whether we're talking about a one-to-one, which is probably a start to do one airport, either to do it remotely at the airport, which is normally a little bit easier than doing it remotely from the airport. I would say that anywhere between 12 and 18 months, including the time that you're using to get your certification. The technology piece is not the biggest challenge. I think I speak on behalf of all of us when we say that from a technology point of view, it's existing, it's not difficult to implement, but there are often aspects of the certification which are misjudged from an ANSP's point of view.
Thank you. David, please.
So I disagreed with Andrew before. I'm going to agree 100% with him right now.
I'm not too sure about that.
Yeah, it's about the time frame is exactly what Andrew says for small airports, right? It's about 1 year for the technology to be installed, and maybe another 6 months for the regulators to go through the certification process. But there's going to be a little bit more work before you even sign the contract. We've been working with GCAA, informing them about our progress and the like, and that needs to also happen as well to do that. The technology is not that difficult, to be honest with you. It's not that we're able to do that one, and to install it is also not huge. Maybe you want to consider, if you're looking into things that impact your time frame, is your communication systems. So if you've got fiber available at the airports, that will lead it towards where we're going to be doing the controlling, the remote tower control center, wherever that is, that's good. But if you don't, you're going to have to run also fiber, so that adds to your time and the like, right? And if you don't have fiber and you want to use something else that might be more expensive in the future, maybe you want to look into fiber and the like. So these are things that are outside what we would be doing to you, but you need to look at as well. But I would agree with Andrew. I think a 12 to 18 months period with the look at construction, installation, training, as well as certification is about right for a small airport.
Peter, I would like to come to you, but I would just want to add one more thing that David touched upon, some of the infrastructure challenges. So the timelines are dependent upon what challenges exist outside the ATM technology providers. So if you could just combine that from Frequentis side, I would appreciate it. If there is any alternate available.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So basically, when it comes to the hardware delivery and installation, that could be quite quick. So I think the fastest installation we did within 3 months, but that's only the technology. So important is that the project itself is prepared properly, so then you could fasten up the process. And in this case, I agree. So the time frame for the first airport in a country is between 12 to 24 months, somewhere in that. And then if the other airports are just a copy of the first one, then it goes quite much quicker, and the typical implementation time afterwards is about 6 months. One of the major challenges and one of the most underestimated challenges is often the network. That's not such a big topic in Europe, but in more remote locations, like in parts of Asia, but maybe also here in the Middle East, when you don't have fiber connection, then this could be quite a challenge. There are new emerging technologies like low orbit satellite constellation, which can help you a lot. So, for example, we are evaluating currently the connectivity of remote towers via satellite. But of course, then the network component gets a much higher importance than all the other components, because you have to consider if the network fails, then this is a serious issue, and then the whole system fails. And therefore, you have to consider the network, and especially the network management, to operate the network between the center and the airport really safely and secure. And that's one of the major tasks in such challenging environments.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter. Any more questions? 3, 2, 1. Well, I would like to thank our panelists for lovely insight into the future of smart digital towers, and look forward to enjoying the show with you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, just another round of applause for the panel. That was not just a fascinating discussion, but I think an excellent example of the hybrid format that we can expect to see going forward. I think the video and the audio there from Andrew was fantastic. We can see that will be used more and more. And hopefully it works well for our next speaker. We have one more keynote speaker before we break for lunch and coffee, and it is Mr. Mervyn Harris, who is the Global Head of Air Traffic Management and Space Programs for Nokia, who will be presenting his paper on building a robust ATC infrastructure for growth. Mr. Harris is currently the Global Head of ATM and Space Business at Nokia, with 25 years experience in the ATM market with UK NATS and most recently with CETA. Mervyn has established himself as a world authority on emerging